Thank you, Madam Chair Woodhouse. John Vellardita for the record. I represent the Clark County Education Association. Come here with some mixed feelings about this. I know there's a lot of hard work that's been put in this by the senators, as well as a lot of people. I remember in the 2015 session we had a discussion about moving off this plan, going to weights. In fact, SB543, which then became SB543, had a provision in it, and this is the reorganization of the school district, had a provision in it that required the school district to go to a weighted funding formula. I remember when the 2017 session opened up, one of the first orders of business of the Education Committee was a bill by Senator Dennis called SB543, and it came off of a study that essentially said, you know, we got to change this funding formula and go to weights. I remember that because I remember the solution to that was $1 billion, no different than today or the 3 previous studies that have been made, very expensive. So to the outside world, this discussion is really very simple. It's about more funding in our schools. It's that simple. So this is a step in the right direction. We think, you know, we wanted to support this. We thought an amendment would be coming forward, and I'll speak to that in a minute. But absent that, at the moment, we're in neutral. But I'm going to go back to the outside world. It's about getting more resources into these classrooms. And I can't, for the life of me, figure out how you can have a discussion around changing the funding formula in the state of Nevada without talking about how do you fund it. I just don't get it. Now, we're not talking about funding in this session, not additional funding, not new funding for the education system. One party controls this government, we're not talking about it. So we're supposed to have faith and confidence in the 2021 session that we're going to start talking about more funding when the Economic Forum said we may have a flat level on the economy and revenue. We may have chicken come home to roost on other expenditures at the state level. And so where will be the political appetite to fund this plan? So for the life of me, I have a hard time understanding how do you reform without having revenue, R&R, reform and revenue, just absent here. Not by any ill intent. I totally understand and get Nevada politics. Doesn't move like white lightning. Very small pace. Last time we had a discussion about funding was in 2015 when another one-party controlled all government, second-term governor, finally came out and said, let's put some more money in education, and did it. Last time I heard Jeremy Aguero speak to a committee like this, he was talking about what bill? It was funding in 2015. It was that piece of legislation, the commerce tax. It was about funding. So I will want to go on record representing CCA that we should have a strategic discussion about reforming the property tax in the state of Nevada as a central revenue stream to fund our schools. Now, having said that, there's a few other things I want to share. One, this commission, great idea for implementation. Long term, though, abdicating the responsibility of the executive office and the legislature to really monitor, develop policy, develop regulations, and have compliance in our state education system to an appointed but unelected commission, a quasi-government agency in perpetuity. I think the bill should be amended to sunset this commission when the completion of implementation has been reached. Otherwise, it's a dangerous precedent. Why do I say that? We saw over the last 8 years the evolution of the Department of Education, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and the authority and the direction of the governor's office on the state of Nevada's education system. Now we're taking a left turn and talking about creating an unelected but appointed agency or commission to, you know, have a lot of power and influence. The next thing that I'd like to share is we've been big advocates of this weighted funding formula and this reform for a long time, all right? And what we've had conversations with the senator, both senators, can we accelerate its implementation rather than a 2-year plan? I get the idea of let's see how it works in 2 years. But you know what? 2 years is a funny thing in the state of Nevada. When you convene again, or people who replace you convene again, and maybe there's a different direction, maybe there's a different thought about how we move on education. So all the progress that's been made, maybe there's a position that says we don't do anything further. So we'd like to see an accelerated, at least get the hook in the second year. And we would suggest it as easy as looking at the current categorical programs, which are school-based. They're not student-centered, they're school-based. When we talk about Zoom in Clark County, $45 million goes to 38 schools, 23,000 kids are there, only 9,000 are ELL kids. 16% of the 55,000 kids in Clark County are affected by that. Why not give the school districts in the second year of this plan the ability to spread those Zoom services to non-ELL kids in other schools that haven't gotten it? That's a movement away from the Zoom model. Another point I'd like to share that I think that should be addressed, although I see it in the amendment, is a drop-dead date where we fully fund the weights. The amendment says 10 years. 10 years, I did some calculation. What is that, 50 million bucks a year? 50 in a generation of learning on the part of kids. We would advocate 3 legislative sessions, 6 years, where you march to fully funding the weights. The weights that Jeremy proposed came out of the Algenbook study. All right, it was the scaled down weight approach. It's still $1 billion price tag. So are we setting the bar low by saying let's take 10 years to get to it? I think we would recommend that we look at accelerating that. The next thing I'd like to suggest is SB543 was a prototype to the weights. Senator Dennis led on that. SB543 said there was a flat value of $1,200 that goes to the most underrepresented student in our school system, and that is the systemically underperforming, bottom quartile proficient student. Not free and reduced, not ELL eligible for dollars. 178 said, let's go after that, because if you raise the bottom of proficiency, you raise the academic achievement of the student body. And so 178 targeted that. And so what we would suggest is that is a weight that should be taken into consideration beyond the 4 weights that we currently have. The other recommendation would be a rural weight. When I went through the SB543 reorganization of the school district and I sat on the technical advisory committee, I was enlightened by the unique challenges that rural schools have that have nothing in common with some of the challenges that the urban schools have. And I think what we're hearing today and what we're trying to fix with this bill around the home harmless for the rurals and whatnot speaks to the fact that perhaps there should be some kind of looking at developing a weight for the rules. And then the other thing that I would like to speak to is multiple, and other speakers spoke to it, we have kids that aren't just ELL or aren't just special ed or free and reduced or gifted and talented. They may be 2 or 3 of these, and I don't think that and I know why we start with they just get the highest amount of weight. But I think we should have a plan where they're eligible for every weight that they have a need for. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the charter authority. Listen, I'm going to be the first one to say to this body and to the entire public, the public school authority is part of the education delivery system in this state. It's not going away. There are students that use it, there are students that do well in it, and there are students that probably don't do well in it. It needs better accountability, just like public schools do. But under this model, we don't have an issue of additional dollars going to those students, but we do have an issue on monitoring the market expansion of charters that have an adverse effect to public schools. Case in point, Clark County building 2 new schools a year over the last few years for a growing student population. They plan to build a school, then all of a sudden a charter pops up and takes away those students that they make plans for. So my recommendation on the Charter Authority is just to monitor market expansion. And then finally, and this is what I want to address, and this is what I was waiting on the amendment, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this ending fund balance and collective bargaining. I get it where the business community and the private sector says, geez, if we don't have enough money, we'll go out of business and we have to wall it off from the unions. But let me throw out some facts that are very compelling, because this is the world we live in. 16.6% in the Clark County School District is $384 million. $384 million. Their ending fund balance by their own policy right now is 2%. That's $48 million. An ending fund balance under law has three categories: restricted, which they deem as restricted, assigned, which those trustees deem as assigned, and then unassigned. In other words, trustees, the governing body of school districts, have the authority to control ending fund balances. We have a recruit and retention problem in this state, this nation, and in Clark County to the highest degree. 500 classrooms started the school year, ended the school year without a teacher. 1,600 to 1,700 teachers in Clark leave every year. We're talking about giving them a 3% raise and finding the money. 3% raise is $90 million. And we're talking about walling off $384 million. The irony of having this body deliberate giving state workers collective bargaining, which we support, at the same time proposing a provision in this law that strips collective bargaining in a meaningful way from teachers. So in closing, we're in neutral. We'd like to support this bill.
Madam Chair, may we have order, please? John, have you completed your time?
I have.
Thank you very much.